The sector designated as X459 was not a glamorous place. It sat on the absolute ragged edge of human-controlled space, nestled within a chaotic asteroid belt that looked like a cosmic junkyard. For Bob, however, it was home. Bob was a maintenance engineer, which was a polite way of saying he was the guy who stopped the small, rust-stained ore processing station from venting its entire atmosphere into the void every Tuesday. Bob liked the quiet. He liked the rhythmic thump-thump of the rock crushers. Most of all, he liked the fact that the station was roughly 3 million kilometers away from New Horizon, the planetary colony where his wife, Sarah, and more importantly, his mother-in-law, Beatrice, lived. On a chilly Thursday morning, Bob was elbows deep in the primary coolant manifold, covered in synthetic grease and muttering curses at a stripped bolt, when the station's proximity alarms began to wail. It wasn't the usual beep-beep of a drifting space rock. It was the deep, terrifying klaxon of a military threat. Bob wiped his hands on a greasy rag, sighed, and walked over to the command console. The main view screen showed the asteroid belt, but the rocks were completely eclipsed by a terrifying sight. Emerging from hyperspace were dozens of sleek, predatory obsidian black warships. They flew in a perfect, intimidating wedge formation. It was a spearhead fleet of the Valari Empire, a prideful, hyper-militaristic alien race known for conquering worlds first and asking questions never. Before Bob could even process the sheer scale of the invasion force, the comms console flared to life. A towering figure appeared on the screen. The alien had 4 eyes, scales that shimmered like polished steel, and a chest covered in metals. This was High Admiral Kalen of the 3rd Vanguard Fleet. "Human installation," the Admiral boomed, his voice translated into a harsh, synthesized English. "I am High Admiral Kalen. Your tiny rock-crushing post is now under the sovereign control of the Valari Empire. You will offer no resistance or you will be vaporized. Once we secure this station, our fleet will move upon your colony world of New Horizon. We shall reduce its cities to ash and enslave your people. Surrender immediately." Bob looked at the dozens of plasma cannons pointing directly at his living room. Then, he looked at the coordinates of New Horizon. He took a slow sip of his lukewarm coffee. "Yeah, all right," Bob said, pressing the broadcast button. "I surrender. No fight here. I'll power down the defense turrets. Not that they work anyway. The targeting computer has a fried motherboard. Just don't shoot the hull, please. Patching it is a nightmare." 10 minutes later, a heavily armed Valari boarding party marched into the station. They found Bob waiting by the airlock, holding a rusty toolbox in one hand and a half-eaten sandwich in the other. They cuffed his hands behind his back and dragged him aboard a sleek shuttle, transferring him directly to the flagship, the Dread Scythe. The flagship was massive, a cathedral of militaristic doom. Bob was marched into the Grand Command Bridge, where Admiral Kalen stood, looking out at the distant glittering jewel of the human colony. "Ah, the sniveling Terran," Kalen sneered, turning his 4-eyed gaze toward Bob. "Look upon your doom, human. Within 48 hours, the flames of our plasma bombardments will cleanse New Horizon. Every soul on that planet will weep as we tear down their civilization. Your leaders will beg for mercy." Bob didn't look terrified. In fact, as the Admiral spoke the words, "cleanse New Horizon and tear down their civilization," a strange thing happened. Bob's eyes suddenly lit up. A subtle, genuine spark of hope danced across his face. "Wait," Bob said, leaning forward. "Are you going to bombard Sector 4? Specifically, the suburban district near the Botanical Gardens?" The Admiral blinked all 4 of his eyes, thrown off by the lack of whimpering. "We shall destroy all sectors." "Why do you ask?" "Because that's where Beatrice lives," Bob muttered, a tiny, blissful smile forming on his lips. "My mother-in-law. Man, if you guys actually pull this off, I mean, I shouldn't say it out loud, but you'd be doing me a massive solid. No more Sunday dinners. No more, why can't you be a real engineer like Sarah's ex-boyfriend?" Admiral Kalen stared at him, utterly bewildered. The bridge crew stopped typing on their consoles. You do not fear the destruction of your colony? You do not weep for your people?" "Look, Admiral, I love my wife," Bob explained honestly. "But her mother, she's a biological weapon disguised in a floral dress. But hey, Bob's smile suddenly faded as he looked around the majestic bridge of the dread scythe. He squinted at a nearby wall panel, then down at the floor grates. He shook his head in deep disapproval. If you guys are actually planning to go through with this, you can't do it in this piece of junk. Kalen's jaw dropped. Junk? This is the dread scythe, the pinnacle of Valari engineering. Oh, really? Bob scoffed, tapping his foot against a metal plate. Then why is your secondary plasma conduit vibrating at 450 Hz? That means your dampeners are shot. If you fire a full volley at New Horizon, the feedback loop is going to blow out the power grid on 3 of your decks. And look at that environmental display over there. Your filtration system is leaking alpha particles. You guys are literally breathing ionized garbage right now. The alien chief engineer, who was standing nearby, gasped and quickly checked his datapad. He looked up at the Admiral with a pale face, nodding slowly. Bob didn't stop. And don't get me started on your primary blast doors. See that slight hesitation when they close? The hydraulic fluid is contaminated. If Beatrice ever saw a maintenance job this sloppy, she would scream so loud your ears would bleed. And believe me, her scream can shatter reinforced plasteel. Admiral Kalen looked from Bob to his chief engineer, who was looking increasingly embarrassed. You claim you can fix these things? Kalen asked, his pride wounded. Of course I can. I'm a human maintenance guy. We fix things with duct tape and spite, Bob said, holding up his cuffed hands. Unchain me, give me your junior tech crew, and let me fix this engine room. If you're going to take out the old woman, I want to make sure your ships don't explode on the way there. Consider it a mutual partnership. Heresy though it was, Kalen was a pragmatist. A flagship with failing systems was a liability. He ordered Bob's cuffs removed and sent him down to the main engineering bay under heavy guard. By hour 3 of the repairs, the Valari guards and junior technicians were no longer looking at Bob as a prisoner. They were looking at him as a bizarre, terrifying oracle. Bob was deep inside the plasma reactor housing, replacing a burnt-out valve, his voice echoing through the chamber as he chatted with Varek, a young Valari technician. Yeah, you think this plasma heat is bad? Bob's voice echoed. Try sitting in Beatrice's kitchen in July. She refuses to turn on the air conditioning because she claims moving air rusts the silverware. It's 45 degrees Celsius, humid, and she's forcing you to eat piping hot soup. If you complain, she looks at you with this cold, dead gaze that freezes the marrow in your bones. I've seen a grown man, a decorated veteran of the lunar infantry, burst into tears because she told him his posture was disappointing. Varek shuddered, his scales rippling with discomfort. A cold gaze that freezes marrow? Does she possess psionic cryo abilities? Worse, Bob said, crawling out of the machine and wiping his brow. She has guilt tripping. It's an unstoppable psychological force. One time I forgot to water her prized space begonias while they were away on vacation. One plant died, just one. For the next 3 years, every time I walked into a room, she would sigh, look at the empty pot, and talk about how some people just don't value life. The emotional radiation was off the charts. It completely melted my psychological shields. Varek quickly noted this down on his datapad under Terran psychological warfare capabilities. By hour 12, Bob had moved on to the fleet's secondary cruisers, repairing their faulty warp drives. Word of the strange human mechanic and his horrific stories had begun to spread like wildfire through the fleet's communication channels. The Valari soldiers, raised in a culture of rigid military discipline where strength was everything, could not comprehend a creature like Beatrice. In the mess hall of the 3rd cruiser, a group of elite Valari shock troopers surrounded Bob as he worked on a broken nutrient dispenser. "Tell us more of the creature, Bob," one brute trooper whispered, his hand trembling slightly on his plasma rifle. "Is it true she defeated a territorial apex predator with nothing but a glance?" "Oh, you mean the neighbor's cybermastiff?" Bob chuckled, adjusting his wrench. "Oh yeah. Beast was 300 kilograms of muscle, cybernetic teeth, bred for guard duty. It escaped its leash, ran into Beatrice's yard, and growled at her porch. Beatrice didn't even step back. She just crossed her arms, walked down the steps, and hit it on the nose with a rolled-up copy of the Sunday newspaper. She told it was a bad boy and that its mother would be ashamed of its manners." The troopers gasped. "What happened to the beast?" the trooper asked, wide-eyed. The dog sat down, whimpered, and walked back to its kennel. "It refused to eat for a week," Bob said solemnly. The sheer authority in her voice, it bypasses the survival instinct. If she catches you doing something wrong, you don't fight back. You just accept your fate. The stories grew more exaggerated with every deck Bob repaired. By the second day, Bob had single-handedly optimized the efficiency of the entire Vanguard fleet's propulsion systems by 20%. But the morale of the fleet had plummeted to absolute zero. The Valari crew members were terrified. They began exchanging whispers in the corridors. "Did you hear? The human commander on the planet has a biological weapon that controls minds through Sunday dinners. I heard she can destroy a warrior's honor simply by critiquing their choice of casual footwear." Varric said she survived a 40-degree environment with no cooling suit while consuming boiling liquids just to assert dominance over her pack. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Kalen was pacing back and forth. His 4 eyes were bloodshot. He had been reading the psychological reports coming from his captains. The entire fleet was experiencing an unprecedented wave of anxiety. Just then, Bob walked back onto the bridge looking refreshed. He had a tool belt slung over his hip and was tossing a high-grade plasma cell up and down like a baseball. "All right, Admiral, good news," Bob said cheerfully. "The flagship is purring like a kitten. I fixed the targeting matrix, cleared out the filtration system, and even optimized your hyperdrive. You guys can now jump 20% faster. You're totally ready to go blow up New Horizon." Admiral Kalen stopped pacing. He looked at Bob. Then he looked at the main view screen, where the peaceful human colony hung in the dark void. In his mind, the planet was no longer a helpless target. It was the lair of a mythological demon, a creature named Beatrice who could shatter plasteel with a scream, crush apex predators with paper, and project a lethal emotional radiation field known as disappointment. "Human. Bob," Kalen began, his voice lacking its previous tyrannical boom. "We have received new intelligence regarding the defensive capabilities of New Horizon." "Oh, really?" Bob asked, scratching his chin. "Like what?" The civilian entity you referred to." "Beatrice," Kalen said, a slight tremor in his mandibles. "Our tacticians have analyzed your accounts. A creature that can mentally enslave high-tier war beasts, withstand extreme thermal environments without armor, and deploy long-range psychological suppression that completely breaks a warrior's spirit. This is not a civilian. This is a Class Omega planetary defender." Bob stared at the Admiral for a couple of seconds, trying desperately to keep a straight face. "Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't want to overstate it, but yeah, she's an absolute unit. If she catches you guys invading her airspace on a Friday, when she's trying to do her vacuuming, oh boy, may the gods have mercy on your souls." Kalen's upper eyes twitched. The Valari Empire fears nothing. However, a tactical engagement against a psychological entity of that magnitude without proper mental shielding would be an inefficient use of our resources. The conquest of this sector has been deemed premature. The chief engineer stepped forward, bowing to the Admiral. "Sir, the crews are already inputting the coordinates for a tactical withdrawal. They refuse to face the gaze of guilt." Kalen nodded quickly, turning back to Bob. He looked at the human engineer with profound respect, almost reverence. "Bob," Kalen said solemnly, placing a heavy-scaled hand on Bob's shoulder, "you have served our fleet well. You repaired our ships, saved our crew from radiation sickness, and most importantly, you warned us of the cosmic horror residing on that colony. You are a warrior of unparalleled courage." "Thanks, Admiral. Just doing my job," Bob said. "We cannot leave you here to perish when that monster eventually decides to expand her territory," Kalen said, his eyes filled with genuine concern. "Come with us. Join the Valari Empire. We shall give you a commission as a High Chief Engineer of the Imperial Fleet. We will take you to the capital world, deep within our territory, thousands of light years away. You will be safe from Beatrice there." Bob looked out the window at the colony world. For a split second, the offer of an imperial salary and a job thousands of light years away sounded like paradise. But then, he remembered the terrifying reality of the universe. He sighed and shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, Admiral, truly," Bob said, gently removing Kalen's hand from his shoulder. "But I can't. You see, someone's got to stay behind and keep that old witch kenneled up. If I vanish, If I run away to the other side of the galaxy, she'll notice, and she will come looking for me." The entire bridge crew went dead silent. The aliens stared at Bob in absolute horror. She has faster-than-light tracking capabilities," Varric whispered from the back. "Worse," Bob said with a grim expression. "She has a minivan and unlimited free time. If she finds out I escaped to the Valari Empire, she will cross the void. She will march straight into your imperial palace. She will look at your emperor, and she will tell him that his throne room is dusty and that his crown looks tacky. She will conquer your entire empire using nothing but a sharp tongue and a disapproving glare. The whole galaxy will fall." Admiral Kalen took a sharp breath. The sheer weight of Bob's words hung heavily in the air. This human wasn't just a captive mechanic. He was a lone sentinel, standing upon the wall, holding back a darkness that could swallow the stars. "By the ancestors," Kalen whispered, bowing his head deeply. "You're not just a mechanic, Bob. You are the guardian of the Orion arm. You sacrifice your own sanity so that the rest of the galaxy may live in peace." "Yeah, well," Bob shrugged, "someone's got to do it." "The Valari Empire will never forget your sacrifice," Kalen declared, his voice trembling with emotion. He turned to his crew. "Bring forth the Imperial Medal of Valor, the highest honor of our people." Before Bob could protest, the Admiral pinned a massive, glowing, ruby-encrusted medal onto Bob's greasy jumpsuit. The entire bridge crew stood at attention, saluting Bob with their fists pressed against their chests. "We shall escort you back to your processing station immediately," Kalen said, "and we shall strike this entire sector from our star charts. It shall be marked as a forbidden zone of psychological dread. Go in peace, Hero Bob." 10 minutes later, Bob was dropped back off at his quiet, rusty mining station. He stood by the airlock, his toolbox in one hand, watching through the main window as the dozens of massive Valari warships turned around in perfect synchronization and engaged their hyperdrives, vanishing into the void at maximum speed. The sector was quiet once again. The asteroid crushers resumed their rhythmic thump-thump. Bob looked down at the massive, priceless alien metal pinned to his chest. He ripped it off, tossed it into his toolbox next to a roll of duct tape, and walked back over to the primary coolant manifold. He picked up his wrench and smiled. "Well," Bob muttered to himself, finally loosening the stripped bolt, "that buys me at least a few more quiet weekends."